My name is Sloane Sterling. I am 32 years old, and in the shark-infested waters of Manhattan's high-stakes branding world, I am known as the woman who can fix any disaster. Except, it seems, the one brewing in my own DNA. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and issued a corporate-style mandate that shattered my world. Don't come home to Chicago this year, Sloane. Vivian needs a peaceful environment, and your principles are becoming a liability. No negotiation, no severance, just a cold ejection from a family that operated more like a Fortune 500 company than a home. I spent that Thanksgiving alone in a corner booth at a high-end whiskey bar in Chelsea, watching the elite of New York toast to their fortunes, while I nursed a neat bourbon and a heart full of cold fury. I had no idea that the woman sitting 3 tables away, a titan of industry who made my mother look like a hobbyist, would become the mentor and mother figure I'd actually deserved. I had no idea that 5 years later, they'd be introduced at my wedding as the parents of the bride, while the Sterlings of Chicago stood in the back like uninvited shareholders watching a hostile takeover. But to understand the empire, you have to witness the bankruptcy. Let me take you back to the phone call that liquidated my hope. I remember exactly where I was standing. It was November 21st, and the Manhattan wind was whipping between the skyscrapers at a biting 25 degrees Fahrenheit. I was in my sleek minimalist office, surrounded by mood boards for a $10 million rebrand and the scent of overpriced espresso and expensive stationery. I'd already booked my first-class seat to O'Hare, non-refundable, because Sterlings don't do economy, and we certainly don't do second thoughts. Madeline's name lit up my screen. I picked up, expecting a briefing on the holiday guest list. "Hey, Madeline, I've managed to clear my schedule for Sloane." Her voice was like liquid nitrogen, a chilling professional tone she used before firing a C-suite executive. "I'm calling to adjust the holiday logistics. I need you to stay in New York." My stomach did a slow, agonizing roll. In our family, adjusting logistics was code for "you're being cut." "Is Arthur okay? Did something happen with the firm's Q4 projections?" "Your father is fine. He's with the auditors." A pause, the kind of silence that usually precedes a market crash. "Listen, I've been discussing this with Vivian, and it's better if you don't come to the Gold Coast this year." I actually let out a dry, cynical laugh. "Are you serious, Madeline? The tickets are booked. The Sterling family dinner is a mandatory PR event, isn't it?" "Vivian doesn't want the drama, Sloane. She's pregnant with the next heir to the Collins fortune, and she doesn't need the stress of your moral grandstanding." I gripped my glass desk, my reflection in the polished surface looking like a stranger. "Moral grandstanding? You mean because I refuse to use my agency to bury the scandal involving Vivian's husband and that offshore account? That's not drama, Madeline. That's professional integrity." "Exactly." Madeline's voice sharpened into a blade. "And that integrity is exactly why you aren't welcome at the table. You always make everything about your standards. Vivian is the one expanding our influence. She is the one securing the Collins merger. You're just a consultant who forgot where her loyalties lie." I stood there frozen, watching the gray slush pile up on the New York streets. 32 years old, and my mother was telling me I was being deplatformed from my own family because I wouldn't be their accomplice. "Madeline, I've already planned my entire quarter around this trip." "Then reallocate your time. Invest it elsewhere. Vivian is pregnant. She needs a unified front, not a critic. You understand?" The line went dead. The silence that followed was louder than any boardroom argument I'd ever had. I understood perfectly. I was a non-performing asset. I wish I could say this was the first time they'd liquidated my value, but as I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing skyline, the memories returned like a series of bad quarterly reports. My 16th birthday on the Gold Coast. I'd planned a sophisticated dinner for my friends, a debut of sorts into the Chicago social scene. Madeline had promised we'd host it at the Peninsula Hotel. But the morning of, Vivian had a social crisis. She'd been snubbed by a local debutante and needed a full-scale intervention to protect her reputation. My party was canceled. My guests were sent polite regret cards drafted by Madeline's assistant. "Don't be so career-minded about your birthday, Sloane," Madeline had said, as she organized a gala for Vivian's recovery. "Your sister's social standing is a family asset. Yours is optional." We never rescheduled. I spent my 16th birthday watching my sister get a standing ovation at a charity ball. Then there was my graduation from Columbia University. I graduated at the top of my class, summa cum laude, after 4 years of working 20-hour days and building a network that rivaled my father's. I was the first Sterling to earn a master's without a legacy donation. When I walked across that stage in the 90-degree Fahrenheit humidity of a New York summer, I scanned the VIP section for my parents. Their seats were empty. They showed up for the final 5 minutes. Vivian had a fashion emergency before a gala that apparently required both of them to mediate. "You understand, Sloane," Madeline had whispered as we stood on the steps of Low Library. "Your sister's wedding prep is a multi-million-dollar merger. A diploma is just a credential, but Vivian's image is our brand." Image over impact. Branding over blood. That was the Sterling code. I learned early that having a soul was a competitive disadvantage. "Don't be so sensitive. Stop making everything about your accomplishments. Why can't you just support the family brand?" It was a gaslighting campaign designed to make me feel like my success was a threat to their stability. So, I stopped asking. I became sharper, colder. I built a fortress around my career, thinking if I became powerful enough, if my billable hours were high enough, they'd finally have to treat me as an equal. I was 32 years old, a powerhouse in the most competitive city on earth, and I was still being treated like a line-item veto. And I finally realized the truth. The epiphany was as cold and clear as a martini. There was no amount of success that would ever buy their respect, because my success was built on my own terms, not theirs. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over Dad. I don't know why I expected a bailout. Maybe I thought that after 30 years, the man who taught me how to read a P&L statement would finally see the deficit in his own heart. The phone rang 4 times. "Sloane." His voice was weary, the sound of a man who had long ago traded his soul for a quiet life in a penthouse. "Dad, did Madeline tell you?" I could hear the hum of a stock ticker in the background. "She mentioned the change in plans." "And you're okay with this? You're okay with your daughter being blacklisted from Thanksgiving because I won't help Vivian cover up a crime?" Another pause. He was calculating the cost of dissent. "You know how your mother is about the family image, Sloane. She's just trying to mitigate the risk." "She's mitigating risk by cutting me out, Dad. It's not drama to have a spine." "It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because it looks like you're choosing Vivian's husband's offshore accounts over me. Again. Silence. I could almost see him adjusting his silk tie, looking at the floor of his mahogany office. Sloan, do you want me to talk to her? 5 seconds. 10. The silence was a bankruptcy of character. I think it's better if you just stay in New York this year. Let's wait for the dust to settle on the Collins merger. We'll do a lunch in January. Something inside me went dead. Not a flicker of pain, just a final, frozen no. The account was closed. Okay, Dad. Sloan, don't be... I said okay. I hung up. He didn't call back. I sat in my office as the lights of Manhattan began to twinkle like a million cold diamonds, watching the city breathe. Arthur Sterling had a chance to be a father, to stand up to the woman who had spent years treating our family like a subsidiary. And he chose the status quo instead. He was always neutral. But I realized neutrality in the face of erasure is just a quiet way of pulling the trigger. But as the night grew colder, a new ambition took hold. If I wasn't welcome at their table, I'd build my own. And mine would be bigger. Mine would be better. And one day, they'd be the ones begging for a seat. Thanksgiving Day in Manhattan arrived with a sky the color of industrial steel, a cold, oppressive gray that seemed to press down on the glass towers of the Flatiron District. I woke up in my high-rise loft to a silence so profound it felt expensive. The city below, usually a cacophony of sirens and ambition, had softened into a ghostly hush, the wind through the window sills at a sharp 15 miles per hour. While the rest of the Upper East Side was busy carving organic turkeys and uncorking vintages older than my career, I was staring at the sleek black screen of my laptop, the blue light reflecting in my eyes like a digital frost. The scent of cold espresso and the faint, lingering aroma of Santal 33 filled the room, a sterile, lonely luxury. I made a pot of Kona coffee, $80 a pound, because if I was going to be alone, I was going to be caffeinated by the best, and sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the steam rise against the backdrop of a frozen Empire State Building. My phone remained a dead weight on the marble counter. No messages from the Gold Coast. No Happy Thanksgiving from the Sterling family office. I had been delisted from their lives with the efficiency of a subprime mortgage cut. Around noon, I performed what I called the social media audit. I knew it was a masochistic move, but in my business, information is the only shield. I opened Instagram and navigated to Vivian's profile. She had posted a carousel of photos 5 minutes prior, curated with the precision of a Vogue spread. The first image was the money shot. The Sterling family gathered in the grand dining hall of the Chicago estate, a room draped in silk wallpaper and lit by a 3-tiered baccarat chandelier. Madeline, Arthur, Vivian, and her husband Brad Collins, all holding flutes of cristal, gathered around a table that could seat 20, but was currently hosting only the essential stakeholders. The caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive PR. So grateful for our core team. True family is about loyalty and a shared vision. Finally, the piece we need for the next chapter. Hashtag Collins Sterling merger. Hashtag family first. I zoomed in, my heart beating with a cold, rhythmic precision as I performed a frame-by-frame analysis of my own erasure. They hadn't just excluded me. They had photoshopped the memory of me out of the room. I recognized the centerpiece, a $2,000 floral arrangement I had ordered for Madeline weeks ago. They kept the flowers, but burned the bridge. There were 4 place settings, perfectly symmetrical. No empty chair, no reserved for Sloane. It was a public statement to the Chicago social elite. Sloane Sterling is no longer a partner in this family. I closed the app, the black screen reflecting my own expression, sharp, pale, and utterly hollow. I thought about ordering a $100 tasting menu from a Michelin-star delivery service and eating it in my silk robe while watching CNBC. That was the expected reaction for a discarded asset, wasn't it? To wallow in the luxury of my own isolation. A tragic figure in a penthouse cage. The dramatic daughter script was waiting for me to hit play. But Sloane Sterling doesn't do sad. I do rebranding. A cold, hard fire ignited in my gut. The kind of fire that builds empires out of spite. No, I wasn't going to let their digital execution be the final word on my identity. I wasn't going to let their peace be my defeat. If they wanted a unified front, I would show them what a superpower looks like when it's untethered. I headed to my walk-in closet, a cathedral of high-fashion armor. I chose a charcoal gray Armani power suit, a crisp white Tom Ford shirt, and a pair of Cartier earrings that felt like small, heavy weights of confidence. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, I was going to do it at the Hudson Club, the most exclusive private members club in Manhattan, where the wait list was 5 years long and the deals made over dessert could move markets. The Hudson Club was a fortress of old-world power, dark English oak, tufted leather chairs, and a silence that commanded respect. When I stepped out of the Uber, the NYC air hitting my face at a brutal 30 degrees Fahrenheit, I felt the weight of my own resolve. Inside, the warmth was thick with the scent of expensive cigars, aged scotch, and the quiet hum of the world's 1%. Families were there, yes, but they weren't the Hallmark kind. They were the Succession kind. Power couples with their Ivy League children, titans of industry, discussing mergers over roasted duck. The hostess, a woman who could recognize a net worth of 8 figures at a glance, looked at me with a flicker of professional curiosity. "Just one, Miss Sterling?" "Just one," I said, my voice as smooth and cold as a polished diamond. She led me to a small, secluded table in the library wing, positioned between a window overlooking the dark river and a sprawling table of 10 that radiated an almost magnetic level of influence. I sat down, the silk lining of my jacket whispering against the leather chair, and opened the leather-bound menu as if I were reviewing a merger agreement. The family next to me was a study in modern American empire. At the head was a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of marble, silver hair in a razor-sharp bob, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a Midwest home. Next to her was a man in his late 60s, his eyes sharp with the wisdom of 1,000 boardroom battles, and a younger man, around my age, who carried himself with the effortless confidence of a man who owned the room without trying. They were passing dishes of truffled yams and prime rib with a quiet, synchronized grace. I watched them from the periphery of my vision, feeling a strange, sharp ache in my chest that no amount of professional success could dull. This was what a unified front actually looked like. Not a PR stunt for Instagram, but a genuine alliance. The server arrived with a basket of rosemary-infused sourdough and a glass of the club's private label Cabernet. "The Thanksgiving tasting, please," I said. I was going to finish this meal. I was going to be the most successful woman in this room. I would go home, draft a new client acquisition strategy, and wake up as a woman who had outgrown her last name. But as the first course arrived, a delicate lobster bisque, I realized my armor was cracking. The taste was exquisite, but it felt like nothing in my mouth. I sat there, tracing the rim of my crystal glass with a trembling finger, trying not to hear the laughter from the big table or the way the older woman leaned in to whisper a secret to the younger man. I thought about the Sterlings in Chicago, clinking glasses to a merger built on lies, while the daughter who had protected their brand sat alone in the shadows of Manhattan. I had spent 30 years trying to be the perfect Sterling, the strategic weapon they could deploy to fix their messes. I had sacrificed my weekends, my relationships, and my own moral compass to keep their brand untarnished. And what was the ROI? A table for one, a deleted history, and a legacy that didn't include my name. If I kept playing by their rules, if I kept seeking validation from a board of directors that had already voted to fire me, what would I have left? At some point, the Sloan Sterling brand would have zero equity. The realization was a silent crash, a market collapse inside my own soul. The tears didn't come with a sob. They were singular, cold drops that tracked down my cheeks like rain on a skyscraper window. I turned my head toward the dark river, watching the lights of New Jersey twinkle in the distance, hoping the dim lighting of the library would hide my bankruptcy. I pressed a linen napkin to my eyes, trying to be invisible, trying to be the non-issue they wanted me to be. Ms. Sterling? I froze, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The voice was low, authoritative, yet unexpectedly resonant with a tone of recognition. I didn't move. I didn't want to be caught in a moment of weakness at the Hudson Club. In this room, weakness was a death sentence. I believe you're sitting at the wrong table. I looked up, my vision blurred by a thin veil of moisture. Standing beside my table was the older woman with the silver hair. Her eyes weren't filled with pity. They were filled with a predatory kind of intelligence, the kind that recognizes a high-value asset when she sees one. "I'm Diana Kingston," she said, her voice a calm, powerful hum. "And I don't think a woman of your caliber should be eating in the shadows." I froze, my breath hitching in a throat that felt like it was lined with the cold dust of a failed merger. A woman's voice, low and authoritative with a resonance that commanded a room, drifted over the back of my chair. "Ms. Sterling?" I looked up, my eyes stinging, the lights of the Hudson Club blurring into sharp, crystalline spears. Standing beside my table was the older woman I'd noticed earlier. She didn't offer a tissue or a sympathetic tilt of the head. She offered a gaze so sharp it felt like an audit of my very soul. She was looking at me like I was a high-value asset being wasted in a bad portfolio. "I'm fine," I said, the lie sounding hollow even in my own ears. "Just the humidity in the club. Old wood and New York winters, you know?" Diana Kingston raised one eyebrow, a gesture that was less about doubt and more about an intellectual challenge. "Humidity doesn't cause a woman of your reputation to stare at a $200 steak like it's a liability. And it certainly doesn't cause the art director of the Sterling Agency to hide in the library wing on Thanksgiving." I let out a dry, jagged laugh, the sound echoing against the mahogany shelves. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who spent 40 years reading the fine print in people's eyes. And I've made a fortune doing exactly that." She had a voice that sounded like smooth marble, yet there was a predatory intelligence behind it, the unmistakable aura of a woman who had broken glass ceilings and used the shards to build a skyscraper. "I'm Diana Kingston." "Sloan Sterling." "Well, Sloan." She glanced back at her family. a group that radiated the kind of quiet power that didn't need to shout. No one should eat alone on a day meant for alliances. It's a poor allocation of resources. Why don't you join us? I shook my head, my professional defenses rising like a firewall. Oh no, I couldn't. I'm in the middle of a personal audit. I don't want to disrupt your family's board meeting. You're not disrupting, she said, her smile as precise and cold as a laser. I'm inviting. And in this city, a Kingston invitation is rarely a suggestion. I really appreciate the gesture, but my husband Julian is currently trying to explain cryptocurrency to our grandchildren, she continued, overriding me with a practiced grace. And my son Jude is about to launch into a pitch for his new venture that none of us asked for. You might as well come and provide some much-needed intellectual stimulation. It's much harder to dwell on a bad quarter when you're arguing over market trends. The older man, Julian, waved from the head of the table, his expression that of a man who had seen everything and was bored by most of it. She won't take no for an answer, Sloan. Trust me, 4 decades of negotiating with this woman, and I've yet to win a single clause. Just surrender your autonomy now. It's more efficient. The younger man, Jude, grinned at me, his eyes intelligent and mocking. He's not wrong. My mother treats hospitality like a hostile takeover. Resistance is futile. I looked at my cold lobster bisque, a perfect representation of the sterile life I'd built. I looked at my empty table, the digital evidence of my family's betrayal still glowing on my phone. Then I looked at Diana Kingston, a woman who didn't look like she wanted to save me, but rather partner with me. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling like a strategic pivot. If you're sure. I'm sure, Diana said, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like a hug and more like a stamp of approval. Come, we just opened a 96 Chateau Margaux, and it would be a crime to let it breathe without someone who appreciates the vintage. I stood up, straightening my Armani jacket, and followed her to the table. I felt like a smaller company being absorbed into a global conglomerate, terrified, but suddenly aware of my own potential. I didn't know that this single moment, this act of calculated Manhattan grace from a woman who was a legend on Wall Street, was about to change the entire structure of my existence. They integrated me into the table with a synchronized efficiency. Someone shifted a chair. Someone else signaled the waiter. Before I could even sit down, I had a glass of the Margaux in my hand and a fresh plate of prime rib. I'm Julian, the older man said, his handshake firm and dry. This is my wife Diana, our eldest Leo, and his wife Claire, and our youngest Jude. Hi, I said, my voice regaining its professional polish. I'm Sloan. Thank you for the... What's your take on the Collins Sterling merger, Sloan? Leo asked, leaning forward as if we were at a pre-market briefing. I heard the Sterling agency is providing the PR cover. They are, I said, the irony like ash on my tongue. Or at least, they were. I'm currently on indefinite leave for refusing to certify a false narrative regarding offshore holdings. Interesting, Sarah, Leo's wife, said. Integrity is a high-cost asset in this climate. It is, I replied. But the long-term liability of a lie is always higher. Everyone at the table nodded. It wasn't a family dinner. It was a symposium of the elite. It was a world where my drama was seen as risk management. Jude caught my eye from across the table. He was around my age, with dark, messy hair, and a look that suggested he found the entire concept of high society hilarious. Fair warning, my father is about to tell his 1987 market crash story. It's his version of a bedtime story, and it's equally terrifying. I am not, Julian protested, though he looked pleased. He is, Diana said, leaning back. Julian grinned. Okay, fine. Sloane, since you're our new consultant for the night, you tell me, what's the difference between a market crash and a family reunion? One is a sudden loss of value, and the other is a slow realization that the value was never there. The table erupted in laughter, a sharp, sophisticated sound, but felt like the clinking of expensive crystal. Jude raised his glass toward me, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. Diana raised her glass as well. A toast to the non-performers who have the courage to walk away. To Sloane, for being the only person in this club tonight with a spine made of titanium. Everyone raised their glasses. I looked around at these strangers, people who held more power in their pinky fingers than the Sterlings did in their entire agency, and felt a strange, cold comfort. This wasn't love in the Hallmark sense. It was recognition. I was being valued for the very things my family had tried to suppress. After the main course, while the men moved to the lounge to discuss venture capital trends, and the kids were being tended to by a nanny in the club's nursery, Diana moved to the chair next to mine. So, she said, her voice dropping into a businesslike whisper, why are you really here alone? And don't give me the integrity speech. I want the raw data. I hesitated. In the Sterling house, vulnerability was a weakness to be exploited. But with Diana, I felt like she was looking for the stress test results. My mother told me not to come to Chicago, I finally said, my voice devoid of emotion. Because I wouldn't help my sister's husband bury a scandal. They called it drama. They said I was a liability to the family brand. Diana nodded, her expression shifting into the look of a predator who had just spotted a rival's weakness. I see. The classic brand protection fallacy. It's fine, I added, my old habits of damage control kicking in. I'll rebuild. I have my own firm. Diana's voice was sharp, cutting through my pride. Can I tell you something I learned in 40 years of hostile takeovers? I blinked. You're a legend, Diana. I'm listening. I've seen families like the Sterlings 1,000 times, she said, swirling her wine. They treat family like a private equity firm where only one person is allowed to be the GP. Everyone else is an LP with no voting rights. And when an asset, like you, starts showing more value than the GP, they don't celebrate. They liquidate. The words hit me with the force of a market shift. You're not the problem, Sloane. Diana placed her hand over mine, her touch as cold and steady as a diamond. You're just a premium asset in a bargain bin family, and you've been letting them determine your market value for far too long. I couldn't speak. For 30 years, I'd thought I was a defect. Diana was telling me I was undervalued. The evening wound down with a quiet executive efficiency. Cognac was served. Final notes were exchanged. When the bill arrived, I reached for my Cartier wallet, but Julian stopped me with a look of amusement. Please, Sloane. This was an exploratory meeting. Expenses are covered. I can't let you. You can. It's a Kingston rule. We always invest in high-potential startups. As we prepared to leave, the Manhattan wind howling against the Hudson Club's massive glass panes, Diana pressed a card into my hand. It was matte black with embossed silver lettering. Diana Kingston, CEO, Kingston Global Investments. Below that, a private number. If you ever want to discuss a real merger, she said, her gaze unwavering, call me. I don't care about drama, Sloane. I care about ROI. And I think you're the best investment I've seen all year. Julian appeared beside us, pulling on his cashmere overcoat. Sunday dinner's at our place in the Hamptons, Sloane. The helicopter leaves from the East 34th Street heliport at 4 p.m. Don't be late. Diana hates tardiness more than she hates bad debt. I shook my head, a strange, powerful feeling rising in my chest. That's incredible. Thank you. She'll be there, Jude said, joining us, his hands in his pockets, a challenge in his eyes. Because Sloane knows a good deal when she sees one. See you Sunday? Diana squeezed my hand one last time. Family isn't always about the name you're born with, Sloane. It's about the board of directors you choose to surround yourself with. I stood there in the lobby, holding a black card that felt like a key to a new kingdom. Outside, the NYC skyline was a glittering grid of ambition. I watched the Kingstons disappear into a line of black SUVs, Diana taking a call even as she stepped inside, Jude looking back with a wink. I wasn't an exile anymore. I was a woman being recruited into a better league. I didn't go to Sunday dinner the next week, or the week after that. In the world of high-stakes finance, a move that feels too desperate is a move that loses. I was a sterling, or at least I had been trained to think like one. Always calculate the leverage, never show your hand too early. I worried that joining the Kingston Circle was less about family and more about becoming a pawn in a different, more sophisticated game. But Diana Kingston didn't call to check in with the fragile tone of a social worker. She called with the crisp, direct frequency of a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. She wanted to know my thoughts on the market volatility in the tech sector and whether I'd finished the branding audit I'd mentioned at the club. By early December, as a brutal cold front sent temperatures plummeting to a bone-chilling 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Hudson River began to choke with shards of ice, I finally accepted. That first Sunday, I stood on the heliport pad at East 34th Street, the wind from the rotor blades whipping my cashmere coat around my knees, before the Kingston corporate chopper whisked me away to the Hamptons. The Kingston estate in Southampton was a fortress of glass and weathered cedar, perched on a cliff overlooking the gray, churning Atlantic. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a headquarters for the people who ran the world. Diana was waiting on the terrace, a glass of green juice in one hand and a tablet in the other. You're late by 2 minutes. In a merger, that's long enough for the stock price to tank. She didn't hug me. She gave me a sharp, appreciative nod that felt more validating than any embrace Lydia had ever given me. We reserved your suite. Julian is in the library, arguing with an algorithm. That was the first of many Sundays. Over the next 6 months, I became a regular at the Kingston table. Julian didn't teach me chess. He taught me how to read the shadow of a financial statement, how to find the lies hidden in the footnotes. Diana didn't show me pie crust recipes. She showed me the secret architecture of her global trust, the one she swore was built on intuition, but was clearly the work of a genius. Daniel's kids didn't call me Aunt Sloane. They called me Sloane the Shark, a nickname they gave me after I helped them negotiate a higher allowance based on inflation-adjusted cost of living increases. And Jude and I became partners in the truest sense. We didn't text about movies. We texted about disruptive acquisitions and the irony of the Chicago social scene. We sat next to each other at dinner, our legs occasionally brushing under the table, a silent current of electricity that felt more stable than any contract. I didn't hear from the Sterlings once. Not a call, not a text, not even a generic holiday card from the family office. For the first time in my career, I stopped checking the tickers because I realized I wasn't an asset being managed anymore. I wasn't shrinking my soul to fit into Madeline's narrow definition of brand appropriate. I wasn't the liability daughter or the PR risk. I was Sloane Sterling. And in the Kingston house, being Sloane was the highest performing currency in the room. It felt like finally finding a board of directors that believed in my vision. One spring afternoon, about 8 months after that first Thanksgiving, Diana and I were sitting on the glass-enclosed deck. The Atlantic was a brilliant cold blue, and the scent of salt spray and expensive sunblock was thick in the air. Julian was inside, probably shorting a stock with Jude. We could hear the low hum of their voices, punctuated by the occasional sharp laugh. "Have you heard from the Chicago office?" Diana asked, referring to my biological family with the clinical distance they deserved. I watched a yacht cut through the whitecaps. "No, and I've closed the file on them." She nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "Do you want to reopen it?" I thought about it. "Sometimes," I admitted, the confession tasting like iron. In the middle of a sleepless night, I'll think about calling Arthur and explaining that I saved them from a federal investigation. But then I remember, they don't want to be saved. They want to be comfortable, and they're willing to bury me to stay that way. "That's a hard truth to liquidate," Diana said, her hand resting briefly on my wrist, the skin cool and firm. "It is." I pulled my blazer tighter against the AC. I keep waiting to feel a sense of filial duty. Everyone says you should forgive family because blood is thicker than water. "Blood is thicker than water" is a quote people use when they have no other leverage, Diana said, taking a sip of her chilled Sancerre. "In my world, I've seen blood relatives sue each other into bankruptcy over a painting. Family is a construct, Sloane. It's an alliance you build with the people who actually have skin in your game." I turned to look at her, the sun reflecting off her diamond stud earrings. "What are you saying?" She smiled, a look that was both maternal and fiercely strategic. "Just that the law allows for a succession trust adoption. It's a way to ensure that the people who carry your legacy are the ones you choose, not just the ones who share your DNA. There are ways to make you a Kingston in every legal and financial sense, Sloane, to ensure that the Sterlings never have a claim on your future or your talent again." I didn't fully grasp the magnitude of her proposal. Not yet. "Think on it," Diana said, closing her tablet with a decisive snap. "The market is moving, and so are we." It happened with the inevitability of a market trend. 2 years after that first Thanksgiving, Jude and I weren't just associates. We were a powerhouse, a dual engine of ambition and intellect. He asked me to dinner at the Hudson Club, the same place where Diana had recruited me. "This feels like a full-cycle return," I said, sliding into the leather booth. "That's because the foundation is finally solid," Jude said, his voice dropping into a register that made my breath hitch. Jude was focused, his usual mockery replaced by a raw, executive intensity. "Sloane, I brought you back here because this is where I realized I was looking at the most undervalued asset in Manhattan." "Is that right? Am I a buy or a hold?" He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip as strong as a closing signature. "Tessa, Sloane, I've watched you rebuild your own empire. I've watched you stand in the face of the Sterlings and not blink." He took a breath. The sounds of the club, the clinking of crystal and the hushed talk of millions fading away. I want to spend the rest of my life as your co-founder. I want to be the person who always has your back in the boardroom and the bedroom. Jude, I know what they did to you. I know you're wary of contracts after the Sterlings broke theirs with you. But this isn't a merger of convenience. It's a merger of equals. He pulled out a small, sleek box and opened it to reveal a 5-carat emerald-cut diamond that looked like a block of pure, frozen light. Sloane Sterling, will you partner with me for life? Will you marry me? I couldn't speak. The woman who had been delisted by her own blood was now being asked to be the most important stakeholder in a dynasty. Yes, I whispered, the word as solid as a bank vault. Yes. He slipped the ring on my finger, the weight of it a permanent physical commitment. The club didn't erupt in cheers. That would be uncouth for the Hudson Club. Instead, there was a quiet, respectful nod from the surrounding tables. And then I saw them in the library wing, Diana and Julian, a bottle of 1990 Dom Perignon already chilling, looking at us with the satisfaction of two people who had just closed the deal of the century. Mother had the vintage ready since last Tuesday, Jude laughed, pulling me into a kiss that tasted like power and peace. I was going to officially become a Kingston. The wedding planning was a logistical operation of military precision. The Hamptons venue, the global guest list, the non-disclosure agreements for the staff. But the one thing that kept me awake in my penthouse was the parents of the bride line. I refused to let the names Arthur and Madeline Sterling grace my invitations. They hadn't earned the right to my brand. They had forfeited their equity years ago. I was standing in the Kingston's library when Diana found me, staring at a draft of the invitation. What's the obstacle, Sloane? I told her about the line, about the lie of putting the Sterlings' names on a day they had tried to prevent. Diana sat down in a leather wingback chair. There's a process I mentioned, the succession adoption. I nodded. You said it makes the bond legal. It's more than that, Diana said, her voice dropping into her Wall Street tone. In the state of New York, we can file for a formal adult adoption into the Kingston Family Trust. It would officially sever all legal ties to the Sterlings. New birth certificate, new legal next of kin. You would be, in the eyes of the law and the IRS, my daughter. You would be a Kingston heir. My heart was racing like a high-frequency trade. That's an incredible move. It's a necessary one. I've already drafted the filings. I don't want you entering this marriage with a legacy debt to people who don't deserve you. I looked at this woman who had seen my value when I was at my lowest, who had given me the tools to build a fortress around my soul. Diana, I said, my voice finally breaking. I would be honored. She didn't cry, but she stood up and held my face in her hands, her gaze fierce. We've seen you as a Kingston since that bisque at the Hudson Club, Sloane. She were just waiting for you to realize you were worth the acquisition. The adoption process was a series of high-level legal maneuvers, the filings in Manhattan Surrogate's Court, the sealing of the records, the transfer of legacy titles. With Diana as my counsel and Jude as my witness, it felt like a victory march. When the judge signed the final decree, the sound of the seal hitting the paper was the sound of my freedom. I was legally Sloane Kingston. The Sterling debt was settled. The wedding was set for the following June. We sent out the invitations with a line that now felt like a declaration of war to the Chicago elite. Parents of the bride, Julian and Diana Kingston. I knew the Sterlings would find out. In our world, news of a Kingston acquisition travels at the speed of light. 3 months before the wedding, my phone pinged with the message from Vivian, the first sign of life in years. "I heard about the adoption, Sloan. Are you insane? You're erasing our family history for a trust fund?" I stared at the message, noted the irony of her talking about family history after deleting me from Instagram, and then I blocked her without a word. A week later, Madeline called 4 times. I didn't answer. Finally, a text. "Arthur is devastated. You're making us look like failures in the Chicago Tribune. Call me back and we can negotiate an invitation." I read it and felt nothing. No anger, no guilt. Just the cold satisfaction of a woman who had successfully executed a hostile takeover of her own life. I didn't owe them an invitation. I didn't owe them a single second of my future. The wedding day was a masterpiece of high-stakes elegance, a visual representation of the Kingston Empire's reach. June in the Hamptons was spectacular. The temperature sat at a perfect 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air carried the scent of expensive salt air, blooming hydrangeas, and the faint, crisp aroma of a $50,000 a day floral installation. We had chosen the Kingston oceanfront estate, where a custom-built glass pavilion stretched toward the Atlantic, making it look like we were celebrating on the edge of the world. In the bridal suite, a minimalist sanctuary of white marble and silk, I stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, while Diana Kingston performed the final inspection of my veil. The lace was a bespoke creation from Paris, woven with threads of platinum. "You don't just look beautiful, Sloan," she said, her voice echoing with the resonance of a successful closing. "You look like a woman who owns her own destiny. The market is in your favor today." I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back was no longer the liable daughter who had begged for a seat in Chicago. She was a Kingston. She was a partner. She was a powerhouse. On the glass console beside me lay the wedding program, printed on heavy hand-pressed vellum. I traced the words that had sent shockwaves through the Gold Coast. Parents of the bride, Julian and Diana Kingston. Underneath, the tagline I'd insisted on, "The alliance that chose her." Diana caught my eye in the reflection, her hand, adorned with a 10-carat yellow diamond, resting on my shoulder. "Are you ready for the final audit?" "I am," I said, checking the Cartier watch on my wrist. "The security team is in position?" I had hired a private security firm comprised of former Mossad agents. After Madeline's final, desperate attempt to negotiate my return, I knew they wouldn't let a Kingston merger happen without a fight. Diana nodded, her expression turning into the predatory mask that made Wall Street tremble. "Whatever happens, you are a Kingston now. We don't bargain with failed assets, Sloan. We liquidate them." I hugged her, the scent of her private blend perfume a familiar armor. "Thank you, Mom." The word was a contract, a bond of steel. Diana's sharp eyes softened for a microsecond. "Let's go show them what a real dynasty looks like." Through the glass walls, I could see the elite of New York and London arriving. CEOs, diplomats, and tech moguls. Jude was at the altar, a structure of driftwood and white orchids, looking every bit the disruptor in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo. It was time. The ceremony was a masterclass in modern power. Julian walked me down the aisle, his pace steady, his gaze fixed forward like a man overseeing a successful IPO. The vows we exchanged weren't just promises. They were a merger of equals, a shared vision of a future where neither of us would ever have to compromise our integrity. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the sound of the Atlantic crashing against the cliffs felt like a standing ovation from the universe. The reception was held in the glass pavilion, lit by thousands of suspended Edison bulbs that mimicked a summer galaxy. The menu was a 5-course exploration of Atlantic luxury: Osetra caviar, Wagyu beef, and vintages that had been locked in the Kingston vault for decades. I was discussing a venture capital deal with a senator when my head of security leaned in. "Mrs. Kingston." His voice was a low, professional growl. "Two individuals have breached the perimeter. They used an old Sterling family credential to get past the first gate. Arthur and Madeline Sterling. They're demanding to see the managing partner of this wedding." I'd been waiting for this, the final audit of my past. Jude appeared beside me, his hand a warm, solid weight on my back. "I'll have them escorted to the helipad, Sloan. They don't belong in this room." "No," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the chilled Sancerre in my glass. "Let them see. Let them witness the scale of the equity they threw away. Let them see what it looks like when I'm the one holding the majority share." I signaled the guard. "Bring them in, but seat them at the redundancy table at the very back, near the service entrance." A few minutes later, I saw them, Madeline and Arthur Sterling, standing at the edge of the pavilion, looking like tourists in a world they used to think they owned. Madeline was wearing a classic Chanel suit that felt 10 years too old for this crowd, her eyes darting around with a mixture of greed and terror. Arthur looked like a man whose stock had just hit rock bottom. They were small. In the vast golden light of the Kingston wedding, they looked like a bad investment. The MC, a man with a voice designed for gala announcements, stepped to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention for a special introduction." The room fell silent, the clinking of silverware dying down. "Before we proceed, we wish to honor the architects of this union. Please welcome the parents of the bride, Julian and Diana Kingston." The pavilion erupted. The elite of New York stood in a coordinated wave of applause. Diana and Julian stood, their presence commanding the space like 2 towers of marble. And in the back, I watched Madeline Sterling's face crumble. The realization hit her with the force of a margin call. Richard and Eleanor, no, Julian and Diana. The names didn't matter. The position did. Madeline grabbed Arthur's arm, her mouth hanging open. "What is he saying? Sloan is a Sterling!" Arthur said nothing. He just stared at the Kingston crest emblazoned on the digital screens. Around them, people clapped, completely oblivious to the 2 people who had once claimed to be my core tribe. To the world, the Sterlings were a footnote. The Kingstons were the headline. Madeline couldn't help herself. She pushed through the servers, her heels clicking frantically on the polished floor, until she reached our table. She was trembling with a fury that was 100% focused on her own social standing. "Sloan, what is the meaning of this? You've legally erased us. You're a Sterling. You can't just adopt into another family like it's a corporate acquisition." I stood up, my posture a perfect 180-degree turn from the girl who used to flinch at her voice. "I didn't erase you, Madeline. You liquidated me 5 years ago. You told me I was a liability. You told me I was drama because I wouldn't help you break the law for Vivian." "That was a business decision," Madeline hissed, her voice a sharp whisper. "You're our blood." "No," I said. the word final and cold. I was an asset you didn't know how to manage, so I took my talents elsewhere. I found a board of directors that saw my value. I was adopted into the Kingston family because they care about ROI, Madeline, and I am the best ROI they've ever seen. Madeline looked around at the senators and CEOs who were now staring at her. She looked like a budget brand trying to compete in a luxury market. "This is a disgrace," she whispered. "No," Jude said, stepping forward. "This is a hostile takeover, and you've been outvoted." Then Arthur spoke. "Sloan." His voice was thin, the sound of a man who had finally realized his portfolio was empty. I'm sorry. I should have stood up to your mother. I should have protected my own stock." I looked at him and felt a brief, flickering sadness that vanished as quickly as a bad trade. "I know you are, Arthur, but in this market, sorry doesn't cover the deficit. You watched them bury me for 30 years, and you never once issued a dissent. You're not a father. You're a silent partner in my trauma." Diana stepped in then, her presence so overwhelming that Madeline actually took a step back. "I believe the meeting is over, Mrs. Sterling." Madeline sneered, her mask of civility finally slipping. "You stole her. You bought her with a trust fund in a Hamptons house." Diana didn't blink. "I didn't buy anything. I recognized a premium asset that was being neglected. You treated her like a liability. I treated her like a legacy. The result of that choice is standing right here." She signaled the guards. "Please escort these two to the gate. They have no equity in this family." As they were led out, Madeline still screaming about legacy and disloyalty, the guests began to cheer. Not for the scene, but for the victory of merit over blood. The rest of the night was a celebration of freedom. We danced under the Hamptons moon, the Atlantic breeze cooling the heat of the pavilion. 1 year later, life is a series of record-breaking quarters. Jude and I are the power couple of Manhattan. I'm the CEO of Kingston Sterling. Yes, I bought my father's firm in a distressed asset sale and rebranded it entirely. I'm pregnant now." Diana cried, a rare, high-value moment of emotion. Julian has already started a college fund that could buy a small country. One Sunday at the Hamptons house, while we were looking at the blueprints for the new nursery, Diana asked if I ever thought about Chicago. "Only when I'm reviewing the competition," I said. I realized that setting boundaries wasn't about revenge, Mom. It was about a proper allocation of my soul. Diana smiled, a look of pure executive pride. "You're a Kingston, Sloan. We don't look back at the companies we've liquidated. We only look at the ones we're building." I looked at the ocean, the waves steady and powerful, and I knew she was right. I had everything I ever wanted. I wasn't a Thorne. I wasn't a Sterling. I was Sloan Kingston, and I was finally, legally, and spiritually, home. If you're out there, and you've been told you're a liability because you have a spine, remember this. Your market value isn't determined by the people who can't afford you. It's determined by the people who are willing to invest in your truth. Build your own empire. Choose your own board. And never, ever accept a seat at a table where you aren't the priority. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.